The time is 10:45 hours. This is the situation. An uneasy impasse has enveloped the battlefield of Albeit, prompting a momentary lull in the action. Although isolated and low on supplies, Kampfgruppe ECHL has performed admirably in keeping their assailants at bay through the coordination of combined arms. However, the tenacity and daring of the Americans has succeeded in wresting the initiative of battle away from their German counterparts. As it now stands, resolution of the stalemate, perhaps even the entire battle itself, may very well lie in the success or failure of Company B to usurp an implicit demarcation line that divides the Veil and separates its combatants, that being the irrigation ditch. The recent U.S. mortar strike on Albeit has succeeded in eliminating half of Kampfgruppe ECHL's artillery capacity. In addition, the salvo evoked all-out panic in the mortar bearers, causing them to abandon their duty to the surviving crews. Nevertheless, these two diminished sections summon the courage to relocate their tubes and prepare for action elsewhere. The number 1 crew chooses to operate from the cover of the easement between the two rear echelon buildings, while the number 2 team redeploys in open ground behind the farmstead. Although both sections have effectively concealed themselves from the enemy mortars atop Hill 146, they've also limited their offensive options. Lieutenant ECHL recognizes this quandary.
In ihrer Anstrengung, vom Deckel zu funktionieren,
in their effort to operate from cover, the surviving stragglers ultimately removed themselves from contact with my command post. This created a maddening dilemma. Our students had succeeded in pinning the American assault troops within the irrigation ditch. They were sitting ducks for artillery. Yet, our mortars were totally incapable of engaging them, either directly or indirectly. I could not allow such an opportunity to pass uncontested. I had to improvise.
Realizing that a lone spotter has miraculously survived the ordeal at the stone wall, which obliterated 2 mortar sections, ECHL assigns him a new task. He will observe the irrigation ditch and serve as indirect fire control for the number 1 mortar section. However, this action will take time to coordinate and initiate. In the meantime, the number 2 section moves into action independently. Blind to any visible targets other than the crown of Point Amos, the team elects to lob shells onto the crest of the bluff. Their assumption is that the enemy has taken up position on the reverse slope and is concealed. In an effort to simply thwart 3rd Platoon's prospects of maneuver, their action delivers an effect more powerful than its intent. The mortars proceed to impact in and around the surviving members of the already battered platoon. Surprised by this unexpected occurrence, Lieutenant Campbell watches helplessly as the attack takes a merciless toll on his exposed troops. Binoculars in hand, he peers over the crest of the bluff, desperate to locate the source of the offending fire. He does so, and then slips back into cover. The dire situation atop Point Amos is transmitted to Captain Dorn.
From my position on Hill 146, it was plain to see that enemy mortars were once again falling on Point Amos. The effect was unclear. Then, the radio squawked. It was my XO. He informed me that 3rd Platoon had suffered 8 more casualties. Our captured mortars were proving to be more than a nuisance in the hands of the Germans. For all intents and purposes, the East Bluff had become an untenable nightmare. Fortunately, Lieutenant Campbell managed to identify the exact location of the culprit crew. With these coordinates, I ordered an all-out counterstrike. It would take several moments for our mortars to activate, but, for 3rd Platoon's sake, silencing the enemy artillery was priority number 1.
Elsewhere on the hill, Butch, the expert sniper, has refrained from firing on a German soldier who is administering aid to a fallen comrade. He instead searches the Veil for another target of opportunity. His spotter directs his attention some 500 meters southeast. Partially exposed outside the superstructure of his Stug, the new target is Lieutenant Spitzer. Butch takes careful aim through his scope and fires a single shot downrange. Fortunately for Spitzer, Dorn's artillery salvo on Alma commences at this same moment. With mortars overhead arcing towards his location, the armor commander quickly rebounds his vehicle towards the sunken vale. Needless to say, Butch's projectile misses its mark. With remarkable accuracy, the U.S. mortar crews drop a volley of rounds into the blind zone between the hamlet and the southeast barn. Almost immediately, one such shell lands into the laps of the suspect German mortar crew. The result is devastating. Having unleashed all three tubes, Company B's artillery barrage produces an added benefit. Much to Eckel's chagrin, the previously concealed German infantry within Alma spontaneously vacate both the command post and the right flank building for fear that a direct hit might cause the structures to collapse in on top of them. The falling mortar shells, combined with the frenzy of evacuating troops, prompts the MG-34 gunner to depart the stone wall in order to relocate his valued weapon yet again. However, in his haste to escape the confusion, he crosses paths with flying shrapnel from a nearby detonation. As a result, the Germans have lost the last of their heavy machine guns, a development that will likely prove fateful. All across the battlefield, the effects of artillery fire and counterfire are causing cracks in the discipline and cohesion of the two fighting forces. The initial signs of collapse now appear within the ranks of Kampfgruppe Eckel as the first terrified soldier scurries for the open expanse of the sunken vale. Likewise, 3rd Platoon has been reduced in size to a meager 1/3 of its original combat strength. In addition, the sole survivor of 3rd Squad panics and routes from the bluff with the squad's automatic rifle in hand. The shattered platoon is on the verge of disintegration. Now that the enemy mortar fire has been squelched, the XO and his team race for the summit of Point Amos to rally the survivors and to administer medical aid to the many casualties strewn about the crest. In like fashion, Lieutenant Eckel also acts.
Ich war sehr enttäuscht, dass so viele der Soldaten unter meinem direkten Befehl Einfluss ihre Station verlassen hatten.
I was very disappointed that so many of the soldiers, under my direct command influence, had abandoned their station when the enemy mortars started falling near the hamlet. I shouted at them, "You are not behaving like soldiers of the Wehrmacht. Return to your posts." They promptly did so. With this incident, however, I harbored no illusion that our existence remained a mystery to our foe.
Back on Point Andy, the ringleader of the fanatical holdouts abruptly ceases providing aid to his stricken corporal upon hearing the distinctive report of Butch's Springfield rifle only moments earlier. While cowering, this instigator of the attack on the U.S. medics comes to the conclusion that the sharpshooter has turned his attention elsewhere. Intent on reconnoitering the forthcoming enemy hill assault, he rises to his knees. Though observing no activity within the ditch, these brief moments of exposure might very well be his last. Having already rearranged his scope back to the crown of Point Andy, Butch collects the fanatic in his sights. Seconds later, the Springfield cracks to life once again. For one unlucky holdout, the round strikes home. Having elevated himself at the exact wrong moment in time, this German intercepts the bullet meant for the ringleader. Shocked by this twist of fate, the fanatic pauses, then drops to the ground alongside the last remaining holdout. Even Butch himself is momentarily befuddled by the fickle fates of war. Nearby, Captain Dorn orders the mortars to cease fire. Their task accomplished, they return to cover and await their next opportunity to send outgoing mail. In order to verify the elimination of the German mortar section, the scout jeep rolls forward to the apex of the dirt road. Achieving a defilade position, they quickly confirm the results of the bombardment. With the exception of Spitzer's Stug, no other activity is evident within the Vale. The jeep cuts its visit short by retreating behind the crest of the hill before Spitzer can bring his 75mm gun to bear. As a parting gift, 30 caliber rounds are sent downrange at the German armor. Emboldened by the end of the artillery strike and annoyed by the audacity of the scout jeep, the Stugs once again bound forward to the base of the farmstead.
Ob aktiv einnehmende Ziele oder nicht, unser unveränderliches Manövrieren.
Whether actively engaging targets or not, our constant maneuvering was intended as a simple reminder to the Americans of the foreboding presence of German armor on the battlefield. We were as yet unchallenged in our dominance of the Vale. The enemy was no doubt watching our every move.
Sandwiched between the rear echelon buildings, the last remaining German mortar team receives its first signals from the nearby field spotter. They proceed to let loose an initial spotting round. Within moments, the 81mm shell impacts the earth on the lip of the irrigation ditch, yet too far west to cause any damage. The spotter begins to translate new coordinates when he suddenly comes under fire from the inhabitants of the ditch itself. Grazing fire from an automatic rifle prompts the German to seek cover behind the stone wall. The fire mission is momentarily interrupted, buying time for the U.S. medics to continue their work. Simultaneously, the men of 3rd Platoon begin to recover from their latest brush with German artillery. The gallant survivors return to the crest of Point Amos to resume their overwatch duties. This includes the wounded BAR gunner, who tentatively retraces his steps back to the bluff. Having finally received new trajectory information from the field spotter, the German mortar section attempts to input these latest adjustments. However, the men atop Point Amos have detected their presence between the buildings. Bent on retribution, they take up positions with a line of sight to the semi-exposed Germans and level their collective weapons at the hamlet. Even the automatic rifleman regains his fighting spirit and quickly rejoins the fracas. However, the distance is simply too great for open-sight small arms. Their gunfire amounts to little more than pot shots. Regardless, the incoming fire serves to disrupt and rattle the mortar crew. They hastily deliver a subsequent spotting round towards the GIs in the irrigation ditch. The shell impacts well short of its intended mark. Devoid of targets and not wishing to remain stationary for too long within the sights of their only known adversary, the mortars, the two Stugs fall back to the tall grass on the fringes of the Vale. However, their overarching message remains perfectly clear. No advance is allowed beyond the ditch without cost. Understanding that it's only a matter of time before the German mortar zeroes in on the soldiers pinned within the irrigation ditch, Butch attempts to do his part to remove the only other obstacle to their advance on Point Andy. He bravely rises from cover and presents himself as a clear target to the fanatics. A deliberate act conceived in the knowledge that no self-respecting infantryman can willingly deny himself the opportunity to take down an enemy sniper. The Germans take the bait, thereby setting the stage for yet another chapter in the tragic yet intrepid drama that is the Battle of Albeit.
You're watching Tales of Virtual Combat on his Story Internet channel.